This is Mag212 and this is my tutorial for how to paint a Nerf gun. So the first step is to actually take all the internals out of your blaster. I've already done this for half of it, and the reason you want to do this is so that you can just have your shell and take them apart, and that'll be easier to paint later. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to unscrew all of these little screws from your shell. Make sure that they're all unscrewed so that you don't rip anything. Once you have done so, you're going to want to pry the top half of the shell off the bottom half with a screwdriver. Then you can set your top half aside, and this is your internal set. Then you're going to want to take your shell with the screws in it, pop all the screws out, and gather them up and put them away because you're going to need them when you reassemble your blaster. So now I've taken out all the internals and parts I don't really want to paint. These are locks, you could just throw those away if you want. So I'm not painting the magazine well, the trigger or the magazine release, rev switch, or the muzzle for legal reasons. Then you just take the rest of your internals and put them in a little bag and keep them for later. So once you're done taking all the internals out, this is what your shell should look like. You're going to have just a top half and a bottom half, and that's what you're going to paint later. Now I'm going to take my other half and just sand the Rampage, and after all the body work, it's going to be ready to paint. So the first step for painting is applying your base coat. This is very easy if you use a spray paint, and I have all my stuff set out in my garage because you can't really paint indoors and you need good lighting. I have some fluorescent lights up top so that I can see everything I'm doing. Another important thing you're going to need is your respirator mask. This blocks out all the paint fumes and probably saves 5 years of your life. So you're also going to need a primer. I'm using Duplicolor vinyl dye. This is just a kind of base coat, and then I'm going to put on my real base coat, which is this gunmetal gray from Duplicolor. You really need a primer for this because it won't actually stick to the plastic by itself, so you're going to need to get a primer. What you're going to want to do first is just shake up your spray paint to make sure that it's all mixed up together, and then just kind of apply even diagonal sprays on your blaster, very light. Don't do it too close or too much of paint because then it'll start to drip and that's not good. Since it is your first coat, you're going to want to go easy on the paint and you'll cover it up later with your second coat. Now I'm just doing the same for the rest of the blasters, and notice that I'm not covering all the spots. That's because I don't want to apply too much paint in one area because then it won't look that good. So now that I've let my shell dry a little bit, I'm going to go in with the second coat. This is to cover up places that were not gotten by the first coat. You're going to want to go all around, so start at one angle, then turn to the other, and just repeat that so that you know you got every place. Some places may be harder to get, like inside the trigger and the carry handle, but don't worry because you'll be able to get that later. Continue with the same technique that you did with the base coat, making sure to get every angle and applying very even, light coats. After you're done, you could carefully lift up your blaster and set it aside so it can dry. Then you just do exactly what you did for the other side of the shell, and when it's done you could set it aside to dry. After you've gone back and touched up little spots that were missing paint, your product should look something like this. Now that you're done with your primer coat, we're going to want to move on to the next step of painting your Nerf gun. So the next step is to paint the inside of your blaster. This is helpful because sometimes you may not have got places like up at the tactical rail here, you can still see yellow, and if you were to look up the magazine well with the blaster assembled, you would see all that yellow. We're going to fix that by just spraying the inside with our primer coat. You're going to want to get all the areas that you think would be visible if the blaster were assembled. This is the same exact method that you use to paint the outside of the blaster, except you don't have to be as careful with the evenness because you're not going to see it as much. It's just to make sure that you mask that yellow or blue color on the inside. Make sure you get all the angles so that if you're looking in your access door or up your magazine well or at the front of your gun, you don't actually see the stock yellow. Now you just do the same thing on the rest of your shells so that everything seems consistent and the overall look of the blaster is much higher. Now that you've finished painting the inside of your blaster, just turn it back over to the side you actually see, and you're going to want to apply your base coat now. You have to put a primer down in order for the base coat to stick because the particular Duplicolor paint I'm using does not stick to plastic very well. I'm going to just spray a few coats of this and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So this is what your base coat should look like depending on what colors you used. I think it looks really nice, and now it's ready for the next step, which is actually the detailing. So now for the detailing, you're going to need to take your guns inside because you're going to want to have a better lit area. I put all my stuff down on this little brown paper because if you don't, you might get paint on the floor and your mom or dad might kill you. For my details, I use brush paints. You're going to need your brush paints and a whole bunch of paintbrushes, a small one, big one, and whatever you think you might need. So you're going to want to open up your paint and then apply a little bit of the paint to your brush and then start painting. Before you actually start though, you might want to plan out what you're going to paint exactly. Once you've done that, you can start. I usually start by doing the boundaries very carefully and applying moderate pressure so that I can steady my brush. It's probably easier if you just put it on the ground because you're going to want to have as much stability as you can. You can use the edges to your advantage and just kind of let your brush hit those edges without you going out of line, and that way it'll look neater. I usually start with the boundaries just so that I know where I can go, because sometimes if I'm not thinking I'll just go out of the lines and that's not good. After you've applied your paint to all the areas, you can just smoothen out the paint with your paintbrush because you want to get a nice finish, and it won't look very good if you have little clumps of paint. Then you just move around to your next area and just go wherever it takes you and stop where it stops. That's the key to it. And for little details and smaller places, you might want to use a smaller brush because it'll be easier. It's okay to have little areas where there's more paint in certain areas than others, but just make sure that you have light coats. It's okay if the black can show through because this is just your first coat and you can go over that later. I wouldn't recommend applying more paint so you don't have to do a second coat because then you're not going to get a very good texture with the paint. Once you're done, close up your paint and go wash your brushes. Another piece of advice is to, if you ever get paint somewhere where you don't want it to be, you could actually use a damp paper towel to wipe it up since the paint is water-based and it comes out really easily. So if you make a mistake, just go over it and wipe it a little bit with this paper towel. Anything you can do to make it easier to paint is probably worth it. I took off this tactical rail here so that I don't have to worry about getting paint on the tactical rail or getting around it. So I just continue to paint just like normal, and if I get little paint inside there, that yellow place, it doesn't matter because it's just going to be covered by the tactical rail when I reattach it. Don't be afraid to rotate your blaster or turn it while you're painting because this will make painting much easier for you. And don't forget about your little damp paper towel, because that's always helpful if you need to cover up a mistake. Once you have repeated the process for all of your parts of the shell, you're ready for your next step, which is applying a clear coat. I've taken my blaster outside now and I set it down on a little piece of brown paper. What you're going to have to do is take a can of Rust-Oleum matte clear coat and just spray this over your gun. This is to protect it from any wear and tear, like if you accidentally bang it or if it makes contact with your hands, you don't want it to wear away. The way to apply this is a little bit different than the spray paint. You just want to get it everywhere and make it really even. So I find that it helps to hold the can kind of far away and just move really fast across it, just so that you can get a thin little film of clear coat. Like your spray paint, you're going to want to get your blasters from every angle so that every part is protected and nothing will wear away. After you're done with your clear coat, you can just let it dry and feel free to apply as many coats as you wish. So now it's time to reassemble your blaster. I put my gun on a piece of brown paper just because sometimes the paint can get scratched off if it's on a hard surface, and that's never good because you just apply your clear coat and you want your paint to last. So once you've reassembled everything, this is what it should look like. It should be in fully functional order. And then after you're done with this, you're going to want to move on to your next piece. And my next piece is the Rayven. So I'll reassemble it and show you what it looks like when it's reassembled. It should look something like this when it's reassembled, and after everything's reassembled, you have to make sure that it works before you re-input all your screws, and make sure that you have every piece you need, like the trigger, magazine release, and the magazine well. After you have reassembled everything, your gun should look something like this. If you have any questions or need help, please feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. But otherwise, this has been the tutorial for how to paint your Nerf gun, and thanks for watching.